webinar is a partnership between Upnotch and Live Alumni, and I would mention a few words about each of these products. Live Alumni, as many of you know, helps universities and colleges with essential employment data for engagement and fundraising. And Upnotch is a mentorship platform to help professionals, entrepreneurs, executives, and other professionals connect and find a mentor. We're all very excited to have you all here, and especially want to thank our panelists for joining us today. The goal of this webinar is to talk about tips for supporting your team who are working from home, and with a particular emphasis on also, those of us who have to take care of kids. I myself have an 8-month-old, so it's been a challenge and an opportunity to readjust my work schedule to accommodate for her as well. And I'm sure many of you and many of your team members can relate as well. Next, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and then I have a few questions of my own, and I would like to invite our attendees to ask questions as well. And I will call on individual panelists to answer them. But if others want to jump in, feel free to do so from among the panelists. And the goal of this conversation is to really be helpful with specific examples and specific tips on how we can all help our teams be as productive as possible during this age of uncertainty. So, why don't we get started with Julia? Please introduce yourself. Thank you again for being here.
Yes, thanks, Sandro. My name is Julia Braun. I am the Senior Director of Procurement at Smartsheet, Inc., which is a Bellevue, Washington headquartered SaaS company. I have been working remotely, obviously in the current quarantine situation, but also off and on throughout my career, different scenarios and different approaches. And I'm excited to talk with everyone about those today.
Great, thank you very much, Julia. I appreciate it. Nancy?
Yes, I'm Nancy Martin, and I am the owner and coach and facilitator of Reclaim and Flourish. So what I do is I work with people all the time who are stuck at a major crossroads in their career or their life, and they don't see a clear path forward. And I help them get back on solid ground, get clear on what their next steps are, and move forward into a life that they love. Of course, our entire world is shifting, and for many people, the goal is just to stay afloat right now. I do work out of my home. I for many years worked in a Fortune 500 in environmental affairs, and I have 2 college students here as we speak, and between those 2 and my husband and I, we are playing musical Zoom stations much of the day. So that's what I do. Yeah, and I'm so honored to be here. I appreciate, Sandra, that you and Tatya put this together. So thank you.
And we're honored to have you all as our panelists, and thank you again for your time. And very nice to meet you, Nancy. Vikram, would you mind going next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Vikram Modgil. I lead growth initiatives for a Seattle-based startup called symbl.ai. We are only a 2-year-old company and just raised seed funding last year. And we operate in the space of human conversation understanding, and with everybody working remotely, that's the context that I could be talking about. I don't have kids though, so I will miss that perspective, but definitely have some perspective on how to manage the remote work situation. I'm really honored to be here. Yeah.
Thank you, Vikram. I appreciate that. Let's see. Kevin, would you mind going next, please?
Hey, Kevin Jaspal here. So I'm a founder of Sonhos Labs, which is a software consulting company. And we run in an interesting way, which I'm sure I'll talk about later, but I've been doing the remote work distributed lifestyle for about 5 years now. And there's been a lot of learnings on the way. So I thought I could contribute to this panel in that perspective. So thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it. Shawn, would you prefer going next?
Hello, everyone. Shawn Miller. I lead a market research team at Philips. So we're a company, yes, we make vents. So we're trying to help out with COVID. We do Sonicare toothbrush, Norelco razors. I'm in the healthcare division. I lead a team of 7 people remotely. I've been working remotely for about the last 9 months, even pre-COVID. So pretty, robust team there.
Wonderful, Shawn. Thank you very much. And thank you also for Philips for all of your help during this difficult time. And Jeff, please, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Malek. I'm the CEO at CodeFellows. And if you're not familiar with CodeFellows, we help people learn how to become software developers. So we do that typically in a very compressed time frame in person, and not recently. We switched to, on the 11th, we switched to 100% virtual delivery of our curriculum. So you can still learn how to become a software developer with us. It's a different experience, and it's proven to be pretty awesome. It's working out pretty well. So I'm happy to be here, and hopefully can add some goodness to this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Tyrone, welcome. Would you be able to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you for inviting me here. So I'm Tyrone Grandison, the CTO for Pearl Long-Term Care Solutions. So a startup that's in stealth mode that is completely remote at this point. And I'm also the founder of the Data Driven Institute, which I've been working with for the past 1.5 years, and that's also been remote. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Tyrone. It's a pleasure to have you as a panelist. Did we miss anyone? I believe everyone has introduced themselves. Nancy, did you introduce yourself? You did, but
Yes, I did.
yes, you did. Wonderful. So let's dive straight into questions. One of the first questions on our minds is, what are some of the challenges that you have experienced managing your teams working from home, and how specifically have you been able to address those? Maybe, Julia, would you be able to start off with that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think, one of the things that's really important during this time is really staying connected even more closely and more intentionally than previously. Where, in an office environment, you have the opportunity to do just a chair spin or water cooler talk. That's missing. And so I've scheduled weekly team meetings, which we didn't have when we were in the office. We had monthly team meetings. Now it's weekly. And it's cameras on for everyone, regardless of what you're wearing or what you look like, because I think that adds another level of personal connection. And additionally, I have weekly one-on-ones with all of my direct reports. And for those who are also people managers, I've asked them to do the same, just to make sure that we're really connecting with every person and making sure that they're okay.
That's great. Thank you. With Shawn, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure do. So my team, like I mentioned, is a remote team of 7 people, very experienced and kind of used to. So COVID, was a little bit of change in that some of my team was office-based and were spread geographically around the country. But I agree with Julia as far as the one-on-ones. I tend to do weekly one-on-ones as well for my virtual employees. And then the one thing I'm really trying to watch out for is, are there any employees that are struggling with this more than others? So as an example, I have one employee, he lives alone. He loves going into the office. He can't now. It's been more of a challenge for him than my other employees. So I'll do things like today, I gave him a call and just spent 30 minutes just chewing the fat with him. And just, again, making sure that He's as comfortable as he can be with the situation, with me, with the work environment, everything else. So that's one example of something that I've tried to do to overcome a challenge of, say, an employee that's struggling with this a little bit more than a typical employee.
That's an excellent point, Shawn. And how do you find out if they're struggling? I can imagine it being difficult for someone to share their struggles. And do you have any tips on doing it in a non-intrusive way, or anybody else who wants to share after that?
Well, I think, I'll start, as a manager, we know our people, right? So we get the warning signs. And in this case, this person I know, he just moved into a new house, he's single. So single is one clue, right? Because there's no, like, if there's a spouse, significant other, kids, there's companionship, even if you're on lockdown in the house. If you're single, I think it's a whole different issue. And plus, I know this individual, he shared some things with some of my peers, so I'm just picking up little clues.
Wonderful, thank you. Tyrone, do you have anything to add to that? Maybe some warning signs that you can think of that can help us as managers identify?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with Julia and Shawn in that what you have to mimic or what you have to recreate is that communication, that interaction with humans, with those that actually need it. And whenever you see, for example, someone that is actually like not meeting what you agreed on as like the outcomes for the quarter or for the month, when you see people having to reschedule because of extra or added loads because they have to take care of kids at this particular point, then you know that that's an opportunity for two things, right? For one, for you to show that everyone should be flexible and have grace on themselves, and two, for you to kind of like manage expectations and figure out like what can be done, what needs to change, and make it into an exercise in how do you co-create a successful path forward.
Sure, and I can imagine that takes a lot of emotional intelligence to be able to observe, for example, challenges at work and use that to understand the challenges that people might be facing, really dive into the core of what could be causing that. Thank you for sharing that. Nancy, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I want to echo whatever was said, because I think it's great that you're reaching out to your people and that you're holding regular meetings. And that was one of the things I was going to mention. One of the things that I have started with my community, I don't have a team that works with me, but my team are my clients and my community that I support. And so I've been offering these weekly check-ins. So it could be 30 minutes to, ask people, how are you doing? Where are you getting hung up? What can I do to support you? So those are some things that managers can ask during those meetings. And it's good to hold those meetings outside of deliverables and deadlines to actually allow a chance for people to share. And sometimes it helps to actually share your own experience to get people talking. And the other thing that I'll note is that by having those regular meetings, it helps to bring out folks who may appear to be holding it all together, but there's a lot of stress going on in the home because there's so many emotions that are swirling right now, and it may come out in other ways. They may be holding it together in their work, but it may be coming out in how their fear is showing up, whether they're overworking or whether they're turning to the news cycle. And there's a whole array of ways that we kind of avoid fear. And so that's why it's really great to have those regular discussions and to allow for a little bit deeper sharing than is normally done in the professional area.
So just
Most definitely. Jeff, please go ahead.
Sorry, I mean, just to add to what Nancy just said, like all my meetings now in this new dawn that we find ourselves in, I start off with a 5 to 10 minute temperature check, where I just say like from 0 to 10, like how are you feeling just generally, and then how are you feeling work versus life, to kind of get an honest interaction and some sort of a bond / empathy building between me and them, because this is not a regular time period, right? And you have to be cognizant that people have issues and they have hurdles, and we're all facing them, and we just need to figure out how to move past them together.
Most definitely, and fear being another one of emotions that's not typically the case in a corporate setting, and we have to be cognizant of dealing with that as well. Thank you, Tyrone. Kevin, do you have any tips that you can share on that front?
Yeah, I think the last version of the question was regarding warning signs, if I got that correctly.
Yeah.
On our team, we do a lot of collaboration daily, and we even assign many times we assign 2 people to a particular task. So we do a lot of pairing, whether it's software or project management. One of the warning signs that I've noticed is when teammates go out of communication, like during business hours. The main thing that, I was preparing for this talk, and there were 3 things that came up between all the things that we do. Having more accountability, visibility, and structure. And so what I noticed is if teammates are just disappear for like 2 or 3 hours, a lot of times they might have gotten distracted or unfocused, or even it's happened where people have fallen asleep at work because they're closer to their bed. And so I think that was a early warning sign on my team. Any individuals that it didn't feel like they were in communication on Slack that frequently. And I love everything that's been said so far about a lot of this can come up in one-on-ones and discussions in one-on-ones.
Definitely. We had a webinar a week ago where we had a lieutenant general of the Army, a retired lieutenant general, and he mentioned how buddy system in the Army and in the armed forces really helps keep the morale up even in the most stressful times. So having that pairing, I can imagine how important that is. Vikram, do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, so in terms of challenges, I think one of the main challenges that we are noticing across, and we help promote teams as a business. So one common challenge that we are noticing is that there is a lot of digital conversation, and it used to be, you turning left or right or just walking up to someone and clarifying things, and now you have to schedule those things. And so people's accessibility, because everybody's on back-to-back video calls, so and they do get an answer text sometimes during a call, but we can't be expecting that. So how do we make those conversations streamlined and manageable? That's where we've been focusing on to help people understand that the conversation you had on Monday at 8 o'clock, how do you recall and how do you make sure that the use of that conversation is proper, and we don't redo or have those conversations again and again. So that repeating conversations, even though things were discussed, because of the recall aspect or whatever, those proper conversation to task ratio needs to be there. So those are some of the challenges we are seeing, and we are addressing some of that through the technology that we provide.
Hey, Sandra.
Wonderful. And I would want to.
Yeah, if I could tag on to something that Vikram said, it is true that in order to talk to somebody, you now have to schedule time with them, and that's typically 30 minutes, or if it's a meeting of more than 2 people, or there's a scope of work under discussion, it could be an hour. But folks I think, don't be afraid of a 15-minute meeting, right? Mm-hmm. Put 15 or even 10-minute meetings on people's calendars, because I have found if I put 30 minutes because I need 5, you end up filling the 30 anyway, and then you've got a 10-hour day of phone calls back to back, and still work to do, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll just repeat it: don't be afraid of the short minute meetings on calendars.
Great. And the next question would have been, what are some technologies that you all use to make it easy for others to solve some of these challenges and hurdles that working from home inherently poses to all of us? And Julia, you really have addressed that. Anyone else, maybe Shawn, and given that Philips is a very large organization, how does technology play a role in working from home?
Well, I have to say we're not super sophisticated. We use Teams. So Microsoft Teams is our primary tool. We also use Zoom and Skype. I've noticed we are doing more video conferencing now. So, you know, we're a very geographically dispersed company with people all over the globe. And it used to be pre-COVID that if you were on a call, we would almost never use the video. And I'm seeing people use video more. I think it helps with engagement.
Wonderful. Yes, a video, and especially inadvertently, you get to meet some of the family members as well, right?
Yes.
Great. Jeff, do you want to just jump in about technology and how does that help?
Sure. Just a few thoughts. I agree, like everything that everybody said so far, super, I'm in alignment with those things. We actually encourage people to, this isn't on the technology subject, but a few other subjects back, but as far as like scheduling time and whatnot, we actually encourage people to just reach out ad hoc over Zoom. And we have a best practices doc that's one of the points in it for working remotely. This is the first time for our team to be completely distributed like this. And I just wanted to make it very comfortable for people to feel like they could reach out whenever they wanted to. So we encourage that. We strongly encourage always having video on. Like if you're gonna have two people talking, you know, don't do it over a call, don't do it over Slack. We use Slack a lot. We use Zoom for everything now. And it's like, just like a few other folks have said, you know, seeing other people's faces is really important right now. I think it's seeing, even though you can hardly see mine because my room is so dark, apologies. But you know, it's important to have that because we're trying to make up for all this lost human connection. And then the other thing I was gonna say to a few other comments, totally agree that now is the time to really focus on reaching out to people more, being very understanding and patient, and being cognizant of their challenges might be completely, you know, off the charts compared to one person's versus another's versus your own. So trying to be very cognizant of that. And I personally have been trying to spend a lot more time in the realm of non-work communication and just trying to bring as much positivity and lift people as much as possible and support them, because I'm fortunate enough to be, you know, in that mindset. I am blessed with a lot of goodness. There are folks that are dealing with awful issues right now, and so if you can bring that, I think it's super important. And spend time, you know, talking to people about things that you typically wouldn't on a day-to-day basis. We suggested that folks start playing games on a regular basis virtually online, and scheduling those. So those are some of the things that we've been doing along these lines.
That's great, Jeff. Thank you for sharing that. And to follow up on you specifically, do you encourage every one of your team members to have a personal Zoom that's running at all times that you can just jump in on an ad hoc basis, or do you encourage special office hours for a block of time that they can jump in? How do you manage that ad hoc nature of that?
Yeah, we've got Slack set up. You can configure it so that when you click on the call button in Slack, it just starts your own Zoom instance. And so we encourage people to do that. We also say, you know, if you're not in a position to answer that call, you decline it and say something over Slack like, you know, it's not a good time on another meeting, whatever it is. Just expect that kind of reaction. But default to like reaching out and seeing somebody face to face and having a conversation with them. And everybody does have their own Zoom account. Some of them, like our instructors, have to have paid accounts because they're instructing hundreds of people at a time or whatever it is in a given day. Other folks don't need that. They can go with the free version. So we try to be opportunistic in terms of saving money. But at some point, if your meeting goes over 20 minutes, and you're stuck, we encourage all the employees, yeah, go ahead, we'll pay for the account. We don't want you to have to end meetings early because of the time limit on the free accounts with Zoom.
Great, thank you very much. And just to bring kids into the conversation, Nancy, would you provide some tips on how we offer flexibility for parents, or how do kids play a role now, in all of our lives, or the lives of our team members? What are some best practices that you found to be useful?
Yeah, well, my kids are bigger now, but in terms of, I think, boundaries is a really big thing, both spatially and time. And so in terms of spatial boundaries, even with small kids, because there are all these Zoom meetings going on, it's helpful to have a certain area of the house designated as, okay, this is the common area, this is where mommy and daddy, or this is where they're going to be working, and maybe even have a sign on the door so that they know, some kind of cue, so that they know that when that's up, that they don't go in there. And of course, what might happen is with the BBC, if you saw the reporter whose baby came crawling in, the toddler came in, and the mom came frantically running in, and that will happen. But in terms of, I think, expectations, setting certain expectations for time, like I did today. I had two kind of different times, moving around to different locations, and then needing my office and giving it far advance notice to, this is what's going to be going on. And so yeah, those types of boundaries are really important now. And what happens if we don't have them is that we end up, last minute trying to shift some things around, and we may, be getting kind of cranky with our family members. So to avoid that would really help.
Great, thank you. And Kevin, I had a question for you about flexibility of schedule versus fixed schedule. What do you find to work best in your teams, to have a kind of a 9-to-5 mode, or a flexible mode where people or your team members can be productive at times that work best for them?
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting question. When you consider working from home, at first it's like, okay, you can work from home. There's flexibility in the hours. And over time, we really drive as a team, even not just me, but as a team, to having core hours. And so out of an 8-hour workday, we have 6 core hours, if that makes sense. So in this time zone, that might be let's say 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And then most of my team is in Argentina. So for them, it's, they would naturally come in earlier. And so having those core hours was critical, because during those core hours, I expect the team to be able to collaborate with each other. And and it also gives them, that's just the general rule. But if someone needs to, let's say, go to the bank in the middle of the day because the bank hours are really short in Argentina, then that's okay. But 90% of the time, these are the hours that we have. So creating the structure actually created more happiness, I felt, across the team, as well as more productivity. And I'm fortunate enough that, because I've been doing this since the beginning, when I specifically have hired people, that was the agreement that we had at the time. So for some companies, it may be also recreating what your agreements look like, because this is such a novel situation. So reflecting on that could be valuable as well. So those are all my thoughts about flexibility.
Great. Thank you for that. These are all great thoughts. Yes, Julia, please.
I'd like to go back to the children question. I have a 14-year-old, and while she's cranky and she is encamped in my office for her schoolwork, and I've been shuttled off to the kitchen, she's old enough to take care of herself and understand the situation. However, I have a really close friend who has a 6-year-old. Both parents work, both parents are on calls all day long, and she's an only child, and she's lonely, and she's bored, and she had a meltdown last week that was sort of heartbreaking. And I think what's important is not just flexibility in the home, but also flexibility from the workplace, right? We're all in a unique situation. Working from home before remotely meant kids were in school if you had kids, or that you had caregivers that you could rely on. That's not the case right now. And so I think that it's incumbent on coworkers and employers to really as Jeff said earlier, I think, show grace to each other, and patience for the situation that everyone is facing in their home environment. And yeah, that means kids and spouses walk across the background and dogs bark. And I have noticed that people are actually more transparent about their humanity in the workplace in these times. And, you know, that it needs to extend to, I've got to go take care of my 8-month-old for the next hour, right? And folks need to understand that.
That's so true, Julia. I mean, especially given that we all live in a home setting, and the humanity cannot be completely separated from our work life these days. And so accepting that is, I think, there's going to be some positivity in that as well. A lot of positivity in that for everyone involved. Thank you. Does anybody else want to jump in with regards to their work-life balance, specifically with kids involved?
Yeah, I'd like to share that I personally don't have kids, but we've got some folks on the staff that have big families. And this has been touched on a little bit by a few folks, but the structure and the setting expectations and scheduled meals, all these kinds of things to kind of keep all the pace of regular life in place I'm hearing very important, and it's very helpful to do with kids to provide that. And one of the ways that they're doing it is to start each day with a daily stand-up meeting with the family, and you go around with each person and you say, okay, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And is there anything that's keeping you from doing what you're planning on doing? And that's, some of you might recognize like a Scrum or a Lean practice. And the kids all have their tasks or projects that they're working on, whether it's school related or not. And it gives everybody a chance to say, okay, these are the expectations. This is what we're going to do today. And then it's off to work for everybody, basically. And so I just thought I'd pass that along. It might be helpful for some of those of you who have kids and are larger families.
Great, thank you. Vikram, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that the way we are seeing a trend is that, you know, how people are using technology to balance things. So there are some conversations that can happen asynchronously, where others can just go to tools like Slack or any other productivity tools, which are more asynchronous, like even emails. And then there are some conversations which really require the team. So you know, earlier I think Jeff was mentioning this, that having a scheduled stand-up to bring everybody together and synchronize and all the decision making that needs to happen. So that's a really good model that we are seeing across the board, that people have these synchronous meetings where everybody just jumps on at the same time. And then a lot of conversation. We're trying to encourage in our team as well to have as much as possible asynchronous conversations where you do not immediately require someone to work with you, but that can help sort of plan everybody to plan their own day. So that's one thing that we're seeing, a host of productivity tools that are there. They solve one part of the entire workday problem. So we are seeing a lot of people using Slack in very unique ways. We're seeing people use Zoom rooms, as you said. We used to have, actually, before even COVID situation, we had something called Portal, which was essentially our own implementation of something similar to Zoom, where it was always on in our offices, all the global offices, and we would just jump on, and as if they were next to us, we would have that conversation. But that was more synchronous conversation where everybody was there at the same time. So a balance of those two will also help create that work-life balance.
Great, thank you very much, Vikram. And I wanted to ask about how, as far as the measure of productivity, now that we've all been working from home for a while, it's a good baseline to compare before and after. We in our company haven't seen any drop off in productivity ourselves. In some ways, productivity has increased, but also wanted to ask everyone here how whether they've seen their team's productivity increase or decrease? And how do you measure that? Is it through OKRs? Is it through sprints or form of weekly one-on-one meetings? If you can talk about just both the change in productivity and measurement, that would be great. Maybe Jeff or Shawn, if I can ask you to start first.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I've seen an increase both personally in my productivity and my team. I think there's just less interruption, right? So some of that productivity is good and some is bad. And what I mean by that is some of the interruption we get while we're in the office, some of it is good interruption, right? If someone asks us a question or whatever, and it helps the business overall. And some of it isn't necessarily productive interruption. So there's a little bit of both, but I would say overall it's increased just because there's less interruption. Plus I find with myself and my teammates, like, we're home, right? So, and some of us are bored or at least somewhat bored. So we're checking email in the evenings, we're checking email on the weekends, we might respond to something. So just because it's more accessible and easier, I think we tend to more be on and maybe a little bit more productive.
Great, thank you. Tyrone, can you jump in, please?
Yeah, so with my teams, there tends to be lots more employees with families. So we've had to be flexible around people negotiating, actually having homeschooling schedules with limited resources, with two parents that have to be working. So we've actually just given up on any productivity measure or looking at activity at all and just focused on the outcomes for this quarter, the outcomes for this month, the outcomes for 6 months, and the outcomes at the end of the year. And we're tracking towards that. And it's recognizing that, how people operate and when they get the work done is going to shift. So that's where we are right now. In terms of productivity dropping or increasing, we have actually actively started talking to people about like what is going to go and what should be pared back. So we manage expectations back to saying, instead of getting to 90% accuracy in terms of all the mailings we put out for this one initiative that we're doing, how about getting to like 70% and that being good enough for this particular quarter? So we've managed expectations back a little bit so people can actually meet them, or we can have a discussion afterwards when they've gotten settled into this new normal to figure out like what can they actually do reasonably.
Great, thank you very much. And Nancy, do you have anything else to add to this?
Well, I can't speak into an overall measure of productivity, but I'm hearing anecdotally from my clients. One person I'm thinking of just spoke to that is a regional manager for a large food chain and thrives on going out and connecting with people. And that's where, this person gets their energy, is from making those connections, getting out in the field. And so I know, like, I'm hearing from people that where all of a sudden everything feels like it's come to a halt when they're sitting staring at the four walls. And I think in a lot of cases the roles have changed because there's shifting needs in certain, in those essential areas. So one moment they might be chasing a fire and really feeling productive, and the next moment feeling like, what am I contributing, really? So I think I'm just speaking from what people are experiencing, and it's a roller coaster of from one moment feeling like they're not able to contribute to the next moment feeling like they are, but it's, using different energy is a different, just feels very different for them. So in terms of productivity, I'll let somebody else follow with that.
Vikram, do you have a thought? Thank you, Julia. Or Nancy, thank you.
Yeah, so from our perspective, so we are an API platform. So what our API does is it joins a Zoom call, and actually I do have our AI is joined as a participant in this call. So our AI basically joins a conversation and takes all the notes. So you're not required to do any note taking. If you want and it helps you remember, you can still do it. And like what Kevin said in the beginning, accountability, visibility, and focus improves when you're not focusing on the tasks associated with the conversation, but having a conversation. The conversations are also shorter. So from a measurement perspective, what we are able to do with this information is that we are able to detect from this transcription, we're able to detect contextual topics of conversation and any action items or follow-up questions, ideas that come out, and surface them separately at the end of the calls to the participants. So now they don't need to focus on any of this. Plus, I think from a measurability perspective, it gives you yourself as a participant, as well as your teams, an idea of where the conversations are going, which conversations are driving ideas or actions, which conversations are really more informational and could have been done asynchronously. So from a measuring perspective, we are able to see a lot of this now possible with some AI solutions. And there are some free tools that are who have implemented our technology as well, mostly the conferencing platforms. But that's one way to look at the measurement. And then overall, the impact on productivity, I agree. I think a lot of people, specifically who we are dealing with, were already in this collaboration space, so they already knew how to deal with this. However, there are some new people who were not looking at digital transformation as a differentiator for their business, but now they have to adapt to this. They are struggling a little bit more, but with and we are learning how to help them get back to at least the same baseline level of productivity. But there are tools out there which solve specific parts of that accountability, visibility, and focus. So from a measuring perspective, we feel that it is important to have some level or some degree of measure. And most of the organizations which are able to get those, they will know where the gaps are in their current setup and can do something about it. But measurement is very important.
That's amazing, Vikram. The fact that they're using your own technology and able to use AI, that's great. And Julia, I mean, being in the productivity industry and specifically in the productivity company, can you add to that as far as how you guys measure productivity and whether it's been increased or decreased?
For the functions that I manage, I would say really our work has not been impacted in terms of productivity. Folks are still doing what they do at the same level and volume as previously. It does feel like the days are longer and the work is like there's more of it. But I think that is probably more to do with like the underlying emotion of the work environment and sort of the toll it takes to work solo, like Nancy was speaking to earlier. Yeah, are we working more? Sure, but we were working 10-hour days before also. So I think we're probably about the same.
Sure. And Jeff, what are your thoughts on this, on the question of productivity?
I think our productivity has gone up, generally speaking. The need for us to switch to online instruction, like the team came together and pivoted like overnight. It was and that's what I think of when I think of productivity. I was blown away at how everybody came together, and it was like this big challenge and mission that we had to get done, and everybody just got it done. And that feeling, that sense that we're in a new world and everybody's got to kind of do things a little bit differently and contribute differently, definitely makes it feel like we are more productive at this point, which is fantastic. And then, yes, we do track productivity, and we have weekly KPIs that we look at to gauge the health of the business and everything. And those are also looking good at the moment. So all good from my perspective.
That's great, Jeff. And can you share some of your steps and thoughts in being able to achieve that? That's amazing that you're able to kind of maintain that level of engagement, but also everybody rallied around your mission to do that.
Again, I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Can you walk us through some of the steps, specific steps that you did to kind of reach that? that goal of where you currently are?
Sure. So I think from the KPI management standpoint, that was just something that we carried on into the virtual world. We have a weekly meeting with the team that one thing we did do different was that we have a weekly meeting that is optional for everyone except for a handful of folks. We made sure that everybody they're reminded on a regular basis in Slack that is happening, and that is getting more engagement during that meeting, which is totally focused on our KPIs. And so we look over 10 or so different KPIs of the company and talk about things either getting better or worse, and we talk about what we're going to address. And there's been a lot more engagement in that with the reminder, and also with the fact that we're saying, we're still doing this on a weekly basis. So that's the KPI side of things. As far as like how we have managed to at least feel more engaged and productive, I think it's more of a function of having to than anything that we specifically, like, I don't feel like I did anything specific to motivate or get people to do more. It was kind of the emergency of the situation. Like, our business was not in a place to do what we're doing now virtually. So everybody just, it was kind of the context of the situation, and having an amazing team that really pulled that off. So
that's great. Thank you, Jeff. And we have a question from Mark to Kevin. Kevin, what were your 3 points of focus? Visibility, availability, and structure. Is that correct? And can you expand briefly defining each?
It's funny, I was just replying to that, so I do have an answer here. Yeah, so it was visibility, availability, and structure. So originally, when I was preparing my notes, I was thinking about like the tips that I've gained over the last few years, and I noticed that the theme to all those tips were one of those 3 things, if not a combination of them. So the main applications or the main things that we do is, like, we use Slack as a central hub, which has been mentioned, daily stand-ups, pairing on assignments 50% of the time, having core hours, regular one-on-ones. So all of these things to me, like, were related to one or multiple of those items: visibility, either creating more visibility, creating more availability between team members, or creating more structure for everyone on the team to collaborate.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin, for that. These are all really good points. Now, in this age of COVID and in this age of uncertainty, Mike, I guess one of my questions is, how do you all provide a semblance of stability and certainty while we live in this age of uncertainty, and knowing that we cannot overpromise or provide things that we don't even know ourselves? Maybe we can ask Nancy provide some thoughts on that.
Well, my response to that question is more of acceptance of uncertainty than assuring certainty. I guess in your businesses, of course, you have to have that perspective of projecting that on a personal level. That's, it's more about this is even more uncertain than we've ever experienced for most of us. And it's part of how can we go through this time with more ease? And part of that is in relating to the balance and to finding a balance in our work life. I think the tricky thing is, then I alluded to it earlier, is that when we have so much fear and so much, so many different emotions, some people it's despair, and it's so easy to, when we each have our own go-to, when we're hit with fear, different routines that we may turn to. And I think a lot of just kind of unwinding that is being able to go out and connect with nature, get out at one time during the day and move some of the emotional energy and the fear of the uncertainty. Otherwise, I think we get really hung up on the fact that it is uncertain. You may be asking your question from a different perspective in terms of how do businesses maybe project that sense of certainty. I don't know, or is that where you were coming from?
I guess my question is more personal, on a more personal basis.
Yeah, and
so thank you.
Yeah, we began with rebuilding those structures in our day, but really building in, as you're building in all these other things into your schedule, is actually scheduling a block of space. Or, the recommendation I've heard is every 90 minutes go out for take 5 to 10 minute break. And so, and then, yeah.
Shawn, do you want to, yeah. That's great. Thank you. And Shawn and Julia and Tyrone.
Well, one thing we'll do is accentuate the positive. Now we're data people. So that's my job, is market intelligence, right? So we're looking at the data all the time. And so like my staff calls, we'll just kind of start off with a positive or two around what we're seeing with the data, the trends. Because one thing we're seeing as a team, again, because we're in the data business, is the press is accentuating the negative and not talking about the positive. So we'll say something about, hey, social distancing is working, blah, blah, blah. And I've got 3 people in Bothell that are right next to Kirkland. So they're like, right in the heart of this thing. And so we will mention kind of a few positives to start off every meeting.
That's great. Thank you, Shawn. Celebrating the positives is so important these days. Whether the wins are big or small, I cannot stress that enough. Julia, do you have anything to add to that? Yeah.
I think also just communicating often and frequently. Our CEO has been a model of that. He's been posting weekly videos from his home office or his closet or his car, just checking in with everybody across the enterprise and saying, hey, we're in this together. We're in a good place. At my level and with my team, just doing the same thing. If I have information, share it and mix the positive with whatever else it is. But I think people are just looking for information, right? So don't go dark.
Yep. I can't emphasize that enough. Like over communicating is what's going to get people over that hump of that distance that they may feel, and it's going to actually get you to have remote employees feel like they're part of this company and culture still. So over communicating, making sure it's actually consistent across the different managers and levels, making sure it's constant, making sure it's correct, and also making sure that you're actively setting expectations as to when people can actually reach out to you, what you expect of them when you ask a particular question. If you're using Slack, how do you make sure that it gets up to them immediately rather than getting to like an entire channel or to a set of people? Knowing when to use Slack email versus a phone call, in what circumstances, being very clear on that. And also like setting clear boundaries around, there's some time where you need to homeschool, there's some time that you need to dedicate to work, and holding those protected, and everything else being fair game to, have a water cooler chat virtually or to schedule the meetings that you need to.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else want to comment or add anything to this? Well, I want to thank everyone for especially the panelists for taking your time during this really difficult period to be able to share your thoughts. I can only imagine how valuable this insight must be for everyone who has attended, and also to all our attendees. Thank you also for taking your time to join this webinar as well. Thank you again. This is recorded, so we will send a link to this webinar out for everyone. So thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate it. And we wish you all good health and to be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of great insights on the call. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.